Aha, part 24. So yesterday we did the restock button. I have now suitably surrounded that in a big fat border so that we know it's done. So the next one in line is the edit button, and the idea is you select an ingredient here and you click the edit button and it will open up a very simple form, much like the new ingredient form really, so that you can just update something if you need to. It's going to be pretty simple, so it should be pretty quick. However, going to take the opportunity to do a couple of library routines or functions or something, because a lot of these buttons are going to have very similar functionality but just doing slightly different things. So rather than repeating code over and over again, I'm going to create a couple of library routines. For example, I might not do this one today, but the delete button is basically doing pretty much the same thing on all of these. It's just deleting a row from the table dependent on some criteria. So we really only need to pass the table and the criteria to a sort of common function or routine to do that, rather than writing it out each time. So I'm going to go ahead and do the old form and the code for the edit button, as well as creating, at least for the edit button, a common function or subroutine, and I will be back. Right then, so that's done. The edit button now works as long as you select a recipe, which I will sort of describe slightly in a minute. But basically, if we select a an ingredient, let's select almond, hit the edit button, we get the edit ingredient form, which I've just created, which is literally a form created directly from the table. So we can sort of edit the details in here if we wanted to. I've got two buttons, the abort button, which is disabled by default, and a close button, which will just close it. Let's open it again. And if we decide to make a change, let's change the weight to 1.2. You can see as soon as we change anything, the abort button becomes active. So clicking the abort button will undo this and close it and take us back. So that all seems pretty simple, but actually it's done a fair amount in the background. So if we have a look at the design view of this, and first of all let's open up the code here, you'll see that when this button is clicked, it basically does some evaluation on whether there's something in the combo box, and then it will call a new function that I've created, and this is a public function, so it's stored in this module here, which is essentially exactly the same as we used before, where we create the error handler. It takes in a few parameters, the form name, the condition if there is one, and the open arguments if there is one, so we can reuse this basically on every subroutine or function in the database when we want to open a form, where we can just pass the relevant bits. It then does that with those parameters that are passed, or it will basically fall out and say yeah, that name of the form couldn't open. So what I've done in that case then is, on this here where we had basically more or less this amount of code here, used to reside somewhere on the open recipe or on the restock button. So I've now converted all of these on this form where it needs to open a form to use that function instead. So yeah, that's that. Now let's have a quick look at the edit ingredient form button. So as I said, it's very edit ingredient form, the edit ingredient form, not button. As I said, it's literally just, you literally select the table, click create and click form, and that's exactly what we've got here. And I've just added these two buttons, and I'm not really going to go over the code because yeah, that just undoes everything and closes, and that just closes. The only difference being is that on this form I have an on dirty handler, which when the form has something in it, it basically just then enables the abort button. As you can see, there's the code for the other two buttons, which is trivial. So that is that. No, we don't need to save those changes. So the next thing to do is the delete button, and I'll do that now. Good. So the delete button is now sort of programmed. If you click it and you haven't selected anything, nothing happens, just like the other buttons. But if you select an ingredient, and let's take Bavarian cream, and you hit the delete button, you get a little warning saying, do you want to delete Bavarian cream? And it's also telling us that all the stock for Bavarian cream will be deleted, which we kind of have to do because we can't leave the stock for Bavarian cream in there if it has no parent. I can't really ever see why I'm going to want to delete an ingredient, but anyway, we're putting the functionality in because basically we're going to use the same functionality for some other things, so yeah, why not? So you have the opportunity of saying a no here, and yeah, that's basically going to bounce out. Or we can say yes, and it's going to say deleted. So if we have the look at the code that works behind that, which is here, the first thing I'll show you is that it's another public function in our common module. So basically we can reuse this for all sorts of things. I have commented out the actual commands which are going to delete that from the database because I don't want to do that, but anyway, that'll work fine. So basically this is, as I said, a sort of public function we can use over and over again. When we call this, we can take in the table name, the field that we want to match on for the criteria, and the actual criteria that we want to match. There's also a couple of others at the end where we pass over if the matching criteria is a number or not, because then we need to add in the little additional quotation marks. And the last one is where we can pass over a string to be notified, i.e. that pop-up and what it contains. So basically, if there is a notification, because maybe I don't want one, maybe I just want it to go ahead and do it without popping up anything. If there is one, then yeah, basically do it, give you a chance to say no. If you say yes, then, or rather if you don't say yes, it's going to bounce out. Otherwise, it's going to basically do that. And finally, it's going to say deleted if you had notifications enabled. So let's see how we're actually calling this. And obviously it's from the control panel. There is this little bit of code under the delete ingredient button, which is basically checking to see if there is actually an ingredient selected. And if there is, then it basically calls that subroutine, passing over the notification text that we want. And it does it once for the actual ingredient in the ingredient table, and then it does it for a second time for all of those, for all the stock associated with that ingredient in the stock table. And that's about that really. So yeah, we've done these two up here and actually created quite a lot of the code we'll need to quickly finish off most of the rest of these. So the last thing I'm going to do is go in here and go into design view. Oops, no, not that. Go into the design view, select these two and click the format and change them from hairline to 6, so that when we run it, we've got these big fat borders around them. So they're done. Watching paint dry would be more interesting.